So, moving on from Kant, who's kind of the epitome of classical deontology, or at least non-Christian deontology in Western ethics, let's talk about contemporary deontology, which in some respects hasn't evolved beyond Kant, although in many respects it has. Right? So contemporary deontology, the one regard in which it hasn't evolved beyond Kant is that what Kant fundamentally does in his analysis of like individual actions when he comes up with his various categorical maxims for why killing is wrong, and killing also includes suicide, why lying is wrong and whatnot, is all of these are forms of structural analysis, basically. Right? And structural analysis for actions in particular. Now, what is structural analysis? Well, in the context of philosophy, what it means is that we are concerned with looking at the components and structures of actions, right? To identify their base nature, right? And by identifying the nature of the action, right, what elements are of it are moral, if any, we can then look at what, if anything, makes them logically inconsistent with themselves, right? When we turn them into general maxims. So we have to understand not just the actions, but also what fundamentally the actions are concerned with. This is why the reading for this week, Daniel Weber's Liar, is a great example of this, because Weber is just doing structural analysis in the purest form, and in that regard he's coming up with a deontological ethics. So let's see. So what Weber is concerned with, first and foremost, is the notion of lying, right? And the rightness or wrongness of lying. What makes lying wrong? Now, he's also concerned with the notions of misleading and bullshitting, right? Which we'll get into. But what makes lying wrong? Well, okay. To talk about what makes lying wrong, we have to understand what lying is. Lying is a use of language with the intent to deceive another, right? To communicate a falsehood. So what is language, importantly, right? If lying requires the use of language, what is fundamental to language is the question that we must, is one of the questions we must ask to proceed. And language, according to Weber, at least, is fundamentally communicative, right? It's meant to express between people, and it's informative. It's meant to carry data or information from one person to the other. So it's not only meant to be done between two or more people, it's meant to be truthful, right? Because if language is meant to be informative, our use of language is meant to be informative as well as communicative, then that information, importantly, should be true. So one of the most basic aspects of language is that it carries with it truth, right, in the communicated information. Which requires also that we find the speaker to be trustworthy, that we know we can trust them to be telling the truth. So a violation of either this principle towards being truthful, or this principle of being, or a violation of the credibility of the speaker, can undermine or lead to sort of an immoral use of language. Right? This is just a very, very basic structural analysis of, what, if anything, makes lying wrong. as an action. And the same thing with misleading. Okay, so there are three further notions that kind of tease out from this, right? If language is communicative and informative, importantly, and this means that there has to be sort of a notion or like an obligation, a general bent towards truthfulness, and trust in those who you're talking with, right? Trust that they are being truthful. Then what are the elements that go into communicating and informing through language? Okay, well, they are three things. There's assertion, what is directly said in a statement, right? So the direct expression of a proposition, an assertion, as it were. So language has to make claims about the world in order for it to be informative and communicative, such as, this definition of assertion is itself an assertion. Right? The idea that language is fundamentally communicative and informative is an assertion on Weber's part. There's also implication, and this is going to be meaning arising from what is said, or from a statement, but which is not directly stated, which is not directly said, right? It's meaning that's carried over and above what's directly asserted. And then finally, there's credibility, right? And credibility is how trustworthy one who makes the claim is. Now, credibility, according to Weber, comes in two forms: credibility in assertion and credibility in implication. And these two things are linked, but they are separate. And it's important that they're separate because you can damage credibility in one without damaging credibility in the other. How so?